Bonjour, bonjour à tous. Merci d'être là.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here for this panel discussion on the autonomy of Europe to health industries. Thank you to our guests, Mr. Bernasconi, Paul Hudson, Pierre Luzo, Olivier Natav. We've seen Bernasconi, who is on a remote connection with us, and we've seen Paul Hudson last week. We have a number of topics that we would like to address regarding the autonomy of Europe, the scope of relocation of health industries, the time for that, the cost that it would entail, the role played by governments, and whether it is the right priority for Europe to think about it. We're going to start with the first topic, which is the scope that could be envisaged for relocating health industries or part of them in Europe. And we're going to start with Paul Hudson's video, because we asked him this question first, and then we'll hear our guest. So we are going to watch Paul Hudson's video.
Firstly, I've heard the calls about the reshoring for Europe. We know clearly that in many ways China is self-sufficient, the US is self-sufficient, and we at Sanofi have over 40 manufacturing sites in Europe, but we don't make every single essential medicine. And when you talk to health ministers across Europe, they've gone out of stock on really important medicines, could be HRT, could be cardiovascular disease, over the last years, not just including the pandemic. The pandemic has brought it to the attention of everybody. 63% of the world's active ingredient for pharmaceuticals is made in India and China, almost half of it in China. So when you're under pressure, you've got to say, how do we make sure the essential medicines in Europe are made in Europe for Europe? And that's the only way to do it.
Alors, donc Paul Hudson dit que
Paul Hudson
tous les médicaments ne sont pas produits en Europe et qu'on a une forte dépendance.
Medicines are not being manufactured in Europe, and that we're strongly dependent on the US and China. He's talking about essential drugs, saying that they could be located in Europe as a priority. Nicola, would you like to say something about what Paul Hudson just said, and would you like to wake us up? I'm sorry, but I am not really in favor of that relocation in Europe. I agree to talk about it with you today, but I don't believe it should be the priority. I think it's a little bit deceptive, because the fact that we don't have that many opportunities to relocate those productions, like Paul Hudson said. Well, he's not here, I'm contradicting him, and he's not here, so that's not the right thing to do. But we could have those essential medicines without producing them. But it didn't work so far. No, it didn't work because we hadn't bought them and we hadn't stored them. But I have a mask and I'm not making any masks. I buy them, I store them, and I have enough of them, so I won't run out of masks. And if I were to make them, they wouldn't be of good quality. So what I'm saying is that when you think that in order to be sovereign, you need to manufacture on your own ground, but there are some limitations to this. We can produce less quality products at higher cost than what is being produced abroad. Economists are talking about comparative advantages. Exchanges, in fact, are there. You know, when we were thinking that we should manufacture everything on our own ground, is not necessarily very efficient. At the end of the day, what we have suffered from during that crisis, and I'm not blaming anybody for that, but it's more an issue of anticipation, logistics, rather than an issue of manufacturing on the French soil. What we should manufacture on the French soil are high-value products that would attract research and development, that would generate good jobs, good salaries, and it is our fate, it's an economic obligation. Since we have high labor costs. We have the highest social charges in the world. So we are forced to manufacture costly products, and those costly products are not necessarily first necessity products. And to continue along this line, and then we can talk about positive points. But the idea of relocating Doliprane, which is something that I wouldn't have done, because Doliprane, I believe you can buy Doliprane very easily. And we have done it because for political reasons, it's good to say, it's a painkiller if you have a headache. Doliprane is manufactured by Sanofi, by the way. No, I'm not criticizing Sanofi. I am just saying that it's a political critics. Sanofi did benefit from the situation, but what is fascinating in the health industry and the fact that it should be industrialized and health sovereignty. How do we organize ourselves so we would make a great innovation in France, to have a smooth access to markets, to have plants, to have the best researchers in the world? And this is going to be done with jobs and logistics, supply chains that need to be envisaged. We should look at innovation, and we should look at the future, and we should not get bogged down in this idea of sovereignty. And I'd like to refer to Emmanuel Combe's work, who is one of the best experts in France. The issue of economic sovereignty is very difficult to define, and when you start opening the door of that issue of sovereignty, you could find anything, and you will not end up with a very rigorous economic position. I'm sorry to say that right from the outset.
Avec plaisir. Je vais être peut-être dans d'autres termes, mais assez d'accord avec ce que vous venez de dire.
Say something? Well, actually, I quite agree with what you just said. My challenge with relocating is that it means that we are going to bring something back, something that has left. And so we are going to bring back something that is old, and we're looking backward. We're looking at something that has left. But sovereignty is not a problem as such, providing that we try to make it something that will translate into a multiple strategy, not self-sufficiency, and not the fact that we are going to close ourselves. We could anticipate our stock strategies a little bit more on essential products, and we could have multiple supply chains and also sources of the supply, like the maritime routes. And contrary to what we've been doing, we should continue to have trade flows, commercial flows, and not to close borders, because if you have relocations, now you are displacing the geographical risk, meaning that somebody is going to have a problem somewhere. So we have to create an interdependency, positive power plays. You will produce what you are going to need tomorrow. So somebody somewhere will need what we are manufacturing, and in return, it will happen somewhere else. So we should create that positive power play, and it will happen if we invest in innovation on future needs rather than relocating past needs. Thank you very much. I'm going to give the floor to Pierre Luzeau. Can you hear us? Yes, very well. So we just had two negative opinions on the mere fact that it would be relevant to relocate part of the production of medicines. Could you please tell us what you're doing and give us your position? I'm not sure you are of the same opinion. Well, I do have the same opinion on some of the points. Sequence is a global integrated group for pharmaceutical synthesis. We do manufacture the active ingredients, and we have 24 sites in the world and 14 of them in France. So I'm really interested in these relocating topics. We've been able to relocate at sequence long before the COVID hit. In 2003, we had 3 French sites, and we strongly invested on this territory. Coming back to what Nicolas Bouzou said about Asia and about what happened during the COVID, India didn't hid the fact that the medical, what they call medical pharmacy, and the fact that they would supply the rest of the world with medicines. And today, India is the first supplier of generic medicines in the world. The pharmaceutical industry in India is supplying about half of the global demand in vaccines, 40% of the American demand. And on March the 3rd, 2020, the Indian government forbade exports of about 10 active ingredients, so the medicines would be restricted to the Indian territory, and export of the paracetamol was allowed only 3 months later, on May the 28th, 2020. So there's a real issue of medical diplomacy from countries which do have that health weapon at their disposal because they manufacture on their territory. And that's a real problem. And to be very honest with you, we need to define what needs to be relocated in order to treat people, and you need active ingredients to do so. And the crisis has demonstrated in a very strong manner that we did lack about 10 essential molecules. And at a sequence, we've been able to know that there were 2 reasons for that: the strong increase of demand, looking at ketamine or propofol in hospitals, but also the very sensitive drop of the supply because India stopped the export. So we do have to protect ourselves from this. And I believe that the only long-lasting way of doing it is that we should reinforce the industrial fabric. So on the long term, we can have a safe supply of those molecules. Thank you very much. Serge Bernasconi, I'm giving you the floor, and then we'll move on to the next topic, which is timing. I tend to agree with Nicolas and Olivier, but also with Pierre. In the field of technical devices or technical technologies, many of them are already produced in Europe. So it's not that we are 100% dependent on industrial fabrics outside Europe. Looking at ventilators, some of them are produced in Germany, in Ireland. So we are already in Europe. Now, what are we talking about? Big phrases saying we're going to reshore industry, but what about industry are we going to relocate? We cannot relocate the whole of industry. Now, what do we consider to be strategic products? And then we have to determine what we are going to do. In the field of medical devices or tests, we tend to assemble elements. So we're very dependent on a number of suppliers, varied suppliers. And it's not as simple. We cannot say we're going to relocate everything in Europe, because whether we want it or not, we are going to be dependent on a number of suppliers anyway, and they are located everywhere in the world. Now, where are there any solutions? I think we need to have that discussion. What happened during the crisis was very interesting. But as industries, we've been able to meet the demand. Of course, at one point, we haven't done it right away. But we have to understand what did happen. It was not only in Europe. We've seen a problem inside Europe. When you have countries closing their borders, which I believe was incredible. And you depend on parts coming from Italy to go to Ireland to make ventilators. Well, there is a problem inside Europe. We need to open borders. I think everybody was surprised by the crisis, even though we should have seen it coming, and it has generated some absurd situations. So, first of all, we need to make sure that in the future we will not find ourselves in that situation. Number two, we have to determine what we need, and we have to be realistic. I fully agree with that. It is an illusion to believe that we are going to be able to make in Europe tomorrow. There are consequences. There is a time issue, a cost issue. Who is going to pay for it? Are we prepared to do it? And we need to have a discussion. I think this crisis has generated an opportunity, which is that we should start having a discussion. There are solutions, but not repatriating everything in Europe. There are solutions at the European level that we have to look at. There are alternatives to just relocating everything to Europe, because that's an illusion. Thank you very much. We are going to move to the next topic, which is the issue of the timing of partial relocation of part of the production. We've asked the question to Paul Hudson, and we'll listen to him.
So the real challenge is how quickly can you do this? Now, again, for Sanofi, we manufacture medicines in Europe for Europe right now, but it's not the same for every single company. You know, we've set up an opportunity by spinning out some of our manufacturing to allow other companies to jump in and make essential medicines in our facilities. They do it to a certain extent now, but to do more of it. We think that work is already happening. But for others to join, it'll be 1, 2, or maybe even 3 years. But it's still worth doing. You know, there could be another pandemic, or there could just be a general shortage of medicines that people really need, the chronically sick. So it started, and it just simply must continue.
Voilà, donc 1, 2, 3 ans pour
donc 1, 2 or 3 years in order to repatriate part of the production. Pierre Luzo, I think you wanted to say something else. When we talked to each other, you told me what you were doing and what were the consequences in terms of timing and cost. So I'm going to start with the timing. I might be a little bit less positive than Paul Hudson. I believe that to relocate molecules, chemical molecules, in a competitive and responsible way is going to take between 3 to 5 years. First of all, because it takes a long time. The validation processes are very long. We do have GMP standards that are very rigorous, and they have to be controlled, and that's the way it should be done. It's something that in France and in Europe we cannot negotiate. I believe that in order to speed things up, there's something that is fairly simple to do. Since we are being asked to relocate, we should be using industrial sites that are available in Europe, because that is going to be the quickest way and the most efficient way to do it. Competences on our activities are there. We do have the infrastructures, and so we have to avoid doing what was announced in the US by President Trump, i.e. to build new plants in order to manufacture the medicines from yesterday and for tomorrow. We do have some sites available. We need to invest in innovative technologies that could be competitive. But it's going to take a long time. And I'd like to add one point. Obviously, we need to coordinate our European approach. France alone is not going to be able to do it. And we need to take a European approach for the whole added value chain in order to avoid creating chronic overcapacities that would destroy our industry. In any case, I agree with what was said by Serge Bernasconi. We cannot repatriate everything. It's an illusion. the pharmaceutical industry is a global industry. There are many interdependencies and many global markets. We need to focus on the molecules that are out of stock, the molecules which have demonstrated that there was shortages during the crisis, and we need to work on this. 3 to 5 years, I believe, is the right timing. Thank you very much. Nicolas, do you want to say something? Yes, I fully agree. The fact that to set up plants in France, it's very complicated. It takes a long time. It's about 7 years. It takes 7 years to build an operational plant. Yes, to get all the approvals. There is a big discussion today within the political majority because there is a law for administrative simplification which is being discussed at the National Assembly. Guillaume Garland, the rapporteur, is trying to reduce the timing, and there is the environmentalist in the majority with Barbara Pompili. She's in favor of strengthening control checks and therefore longer times. So there is a discussion within the parliamentary majority. But in any case, it's going to take a long time to set up plants in France or to repatriate, which is the same thing. So how do we make our industrial tool bigger and more adapted or more scalable? Because that's what is fascinating, intellectually speaking. How can we manage to have an industrial tool that could manufacture different types of products? Let me use an example very briefly. At the beginning of the crisis, we said we need mask plants in France, but the answer is no. We were talking about overproduction. Here we're faced with a respiratory virus. Next time it might be a digestive virus, and we might need something else. So the question is not to have face plants, mask plants, but a plant that can produce other things. It worked very well with the hydroalcoholic gel. Last week somebody came to see me and gave me a big bottle of gel, and I said, but of sanitizer, and I said, but what are you doing? And he said, I make a barbecue sauce. So, you know, we need to take policies that will favor investments. That's the right angle. We need to push investments forward in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm opening an open door here, but in industry as general, we need to push investments forward in the digital. We don't have many robots in France, additive manufacturing, 3D printing. We don't have any enough 3D printing in France. And we need to increase our industrial capacity and make it more flexible. I'm not going to make any comments on timing, but just to add 2 points. In fact, the production chain is quite complex. So what are we talking about? We're talking about manufacturing, packaging, finishing, raw materials. It takes time. And like Nicolas was saying, on top of the technological and technical time, it takes administrative time. In France, we have very strict environmental and social standards. And so there is a timing that cannot be reduced. I'd like to give you a personal example. We are talking about producing future medicines, and we are going to move from a chemical medicine, dry form medicine, to a more biological medicine. And bioproduction in France is quite late. We have 32 sites of bioproduction. And amongst those sites, what is lacking is the ability to produce commercial packs, to be in a situation to manufacture and to supply. And I had a personal experience because we are involved in looking for a vaccine in a partnership with the Oxford University. When we tried to create our supply chain in France with partners, we couldn't find in France the right partner that would be able to modify his chains quickly to include our living viral vector. I haven't found anybody in France. There is no partner available, and it's not possible because of the timing and because of the production capacity. So these are challenges, real challenges that we have. And we need to find a way to be able to respond very quickly, to shift very quickly from one chain that was dedicated to something else, or a car manufacturer making ventilators, LVMH making sanitizer. So we can shift a chain or reinvent production. So these are interesting challenges, and this would overcome the difficulty of building a plant from scratch. Now, medical devices have been involved in this ability to make production more flexible. So I will let you answer, Pierre Luzeau. Now, the question about timing, I don't know if I can answer that. Some products could be manufactured quicker, for others it would take longer. We're talking about health products. We're not making candies, we're making health products. There are strong and demanding regulations, which is very good because this is reassuring patients. I think there are parameters. We need to think at the European level. We cannot think at the country level. And also, one of the problems is how much are we talking about? Which volume are we talking about? Which type of demand? One of the big problems that we had during the first phase of the crisis was that nobody knew what we were talking about. Were we talking about 10,000, 100,000, 1 million? Industries have tried to respond as fast as possible, but I think we do have many ventilators today on car parks waiting to be rented. I think that we need to discuss this with authorities, and not only national authorities. It would be necessary for national authorities to agree at the European level, and we could already have a vision. We don't know where we're going to. We understand the principle, which is fully acceptable, but we don't know what the quantity is. If we don't do that work, if tomorrow we have to be faced with a second wave, we won't have time to change production sites. We'll have to do with what we had. I hope that it will be easier than for the first time. But then we have to talk about what we want, how, and for how long. The time, it cannot be a short time. I know that, unfortunately, sometimes there is a political pressure. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The next pandemic, if we don't have any face masks, that won't do it. Yeah, industries are faced with that political pressure, and we need to find a way, because we are being told, okay, tomorrow you need to have a production site in France for all products. And you know what? We love you, but we won't be able to do it. The other topic is collaboration between industries. We know that many industries have started to collaborate, that you have collaborated with some universities. Do you think there will be more collaboration?
So, within the framework of this vaccine development, we have been working with universities, and we've launched a partnership with what we call the CDMOs, those manufacturing, so bottling, for instance, and so that's extremely interesting by way of a type of partnership. So it's production, but not necessarily kind of internal production to laboratories. So these partnerships are really important. And if we talk about vaccine for a few moments, we have partnerships with MSD in cancerology, Dashi in cancerology, because we can do R&D as well as commercialization together. So we can pool resources, mutual resources, and leverage each other's expertise. So for ADC, antibodies, which are highly innovative, and we have this capacity and experience in oncology. And that is there and slightly ahead in them in this field. So it's something that, when it comes to go-to-market, is something that can allow us to move faster, to meet patients' needs faster. So PPP, looking at other partnerships for go-to-markets, and so now is the time to open up. So Sanofi has a partnership with GSK on vaccines as well. We asked a question to Paul Hudson. Let's listen to Paul Hudson now.
To satisfy all of the needs of all of the essential medicines, you need a high degree of collaboration. You need to share facilities, which is why we're creating this standalone facility, or 6 facilities across Europe that could respond to that demand. But it also needs some serious collaboration from governments across Europe. You have to understand why we're in this situation to begin with. As pressure came on prices for genericized medicines or essential medicines in Europe, inevitably they moved to areas with lower labor costs, perhaps not quite as strict quality controls like India and China, which meant prices just kept falling, so we couldn't afford to do it. Now, to have the right labour laws, to have the right quality standards here in Europe means that governments will have to step in and say, we will buy a percentage or all of the essential medicines from a trusted manufacturing base here in Europe for Europe. So that may have a premium to it, but it's really just to reflect the cost of making medicines in Europe. And that means we will guarantee supply. And that collaboration is going to be essential.
Alors c'est bien parce qu'il a jeté 3 sujets là.
It's good because he's embarked on 3 different topics, and set of questions: the state and the cost of production. So let's look at the collaborations. That's the good side of the crisis. For the first time in the history of mankind, all the countries around the world have a common enemy to address. It's a virus. Namely, it's not in war where there's oppositions within mankind, and here it's not the case. This is a global crisis, and at the end of the day, it's an extremely important opportunity to collaborate globally. And so we have been, some of the economies have been shattered by what has been going on. Look at what's happening in governments these days. Irrespective of what they're doing, this is not good. And they do this, they do that, and it doesn't address the issues. So, but the brighter side of things is that it compels us to change our habits in industrial fields. It compels us to move towards collaborations that will put together people who are, in some other respects, competitors. Now, in terms of the strategy of the business and management, I think many companies will get out of this period stronger. And it has been such a shock, and changes have been so significant that shouldn't go back, not at all. And if after the crisis we go back to the habits of before the crisis, that means that the crisis would only have had negative effects. So collaborations between public-private sectors, between private stakeholders, in terms of what we're learning in terms of regulatory stumbling blocks, obstacles, and we need to take away those lessons. And after this very, very serious crisis, there's rebirth and crisis, which we're going to be experiencing in France over the next weeks and months. It's going to be disastrous. Yes, it's going to be very complicated, but I'm very optimistic. Comes 5 years, 10 years down the road. I think the big winners of the crisis will be the beyond those in their 50s will be the younger generations. So there's lots of takeaways there, and the positive effect of the crisis will be felt in the long run. How about you? What is your take on this? Well, as As I stated at the start, we are a very technology-intensive business. We're used to working with many different suppliers. In the phases of the COVID, some of the experiences have been successful, others have led to failures. And what has been a source of concern here is to manage to produce quality, to deliver quality products. And in a phase of crisis, everything opens up. We can do everything because at the core, lies the patient. So patient is key. And from industrial standpoint, we did not manage to meet the level of requirements that we must comply with, that we must deliver in the field of medical industry. Now, yes, we can do, but there has to be demand for quality. We should not be in a form of reactivity, but in a form of proactivity. What else can be done? Cooperations, opportunities there. Yeah, that's interesting. But careful now, you have masks. Okay, but I'd be very concerned to see what can be done, what has been done in terms of masks, but I'm not convinced that all masks meet quality standards and quality requirements from a regulatory standpoint, from a medical standpoint. Everybody can manufacture masks, but if you wear masks that don't protect you, that are not efficient, then there's an issue there. And so we are in a regulated sector, requirements in terms of quality, efficiency. We can't question that. I'll be a bit more optimistic than Nicolas in terms of the 5 to 10 year period. I think within the next 3 years, 3 years down the road. And at AstraZeneca, we drove these with France Biotech, and MedTech in France, what we call the collaboration for innovation and health. So bringing together our synergies within a matter of 48 hours, 400 startups approached us, so patients can stay at home as opposed to going to hospitals, so to prevent any bottleneck in the hospitals, and collaborations between cities and hospitals. And not all of this was successful, but over 20 laboratories partnered with us. We had the LAM in support of these, INATO Santé, APHP, the Greater Paris Hospital Authority, and 2.5 million for 20 projects. I have been shortlisted out of the 400 at the start. So that's really, these cooperations is key for to address in an innovative way impact and on healthcare delivery. As a response to the crisis, the patient is at the center of this. We've seen extremely interesting partnerships in the digital field. So spent years to say whether we would make progress or not. But within a matter of weeks, as opposed to years, we addressed all these issues, and we did a tremendous step forward. And I agree, we should not go back to what things were like pre-crisis, because in some of the countries, people feel this will to say, oh, hold on a second, that was crisis mode, but that bears a significant additional cost. Maybe we might not take care or reimburse this a lot. But we've demonstrated that this provides what was done, offers solutions for the patients, and it would be a real shame, a real pity to say, well, that was only during the crisis. Now it's over. It's back to how things were. So, thanks to the COVID crisis, we've made this tremendous leap forward and to demonstrate that there were solutions indeed. And please, let us not get back. So the role of states. So Paulson said, well, the states must commit So when it comes to sovereignty, European sovereignty, so the states have played passive roles in this crisis. And so what will be the role of the states to encourage and to spur on industrial players? We can be very critical towards one's country and government, but the state has done tremendous things to support its economy. This has been the French state, namely, and consisting in saying that the strategy of I attended some of those meetings, and I said, people said, well, we're going to do our utmost to protect businesses, and the war was done, and it was unprecedented. It's unparalleled. And we also need for businesses to understand that the state in France is on the side of its businesses and has put up massive resources, and this will come to an end because the recovery plan is a historical recovery plan. And it's unprecedented. There will never be one like that in the future. So, and it's very much linked to what we said. Temptation in France, as can be seen in promote medical services. Said, well, during the crisis, okay, use my heart in the field of hospital organizations. So we addressed lots of obstacles during the crisis, and we're going to be putting these constraints back. And this is up to us to do, when it comes to telemedicine, when it comes to organizations. And what we did during the crisis is a source of extremely concrete outcome and source of inspiration. So we need to push the states. So let us take a look at the next video of Paul Hudson. What would he require from the states?
Yeah, I do have some advice, which is to stand back and understand what we're trying to do here. On one hand, ministers of health from across the countries in Europe, major countries, called me to say, we can't get this drug or we can't get that drug, can you help? And they disconnect it from the fact that prices were driven so low that they ended up in China and India. You can't really disconnect those conversations. But we're also realistic so that we know that as supply comes back on, they will inevitably move to the lower cost countries again because economies will be under pressure, clearly, after COVID-19. What we need is states stepping forward and saying, we understand that it's important to have continuity of supply, so a percentage of our purchasing will come from medicines made in Europe. Maybe not all, but we need to make sure that the patients do not go without. That's got to be the absolute #1 priority. And the cost difference we're talking is small and only reflects the cost of having high quality workers in Europe. So, I ask people to step back and say, understand the big picture, because a cent saved here can mean somebody goes without a medicine, and that just isn't acceptable. All of us are in healthcare for the right reasons, and we have to find a way to bridge that gap. I think it can be done.
Alors Pierre Luzeau, on est en plein dans la question justement.
So really full on in terms of the matter pertaining to the additional costs of producing in Europe. And this is your job. So give us orders of magnitude what that entails, to take concrete examples and say what this would involve. If actions was to take place in Europe, well, first of all, I'd like to say that I fully agree with what Paul Hudson said. So limiting stop disruptions or shortages. Let us work and continue to work on innovations, looking at quality process and respectful of the environment and obviously efficient. When we work on this competitive process, I'm talking about technologies we're going to be using. We show many drugs at sequence, so continuous chemistry. More competitive, making it more competitive than our Asian competitors. Consumption of energy of a few tenths of percentage. Repackaging production units by a factor of 10 or 100, making them more efficient. and allowing to have a number of sequencing and chemical reactions way more limited. In other words, to sum up, and come to equivalent costs that of Asian manufacturers or lower costs. So, in specific cases out of paracetamol, which we're working very actively. So, if we take the cost of paracetamol in terms of its active principle, that accounts under 5% for the consumer. And if we take into account the potential over cost to manufacture this in Europe, to reshore it, we're talking, 1% out of the price tag of one box of paracetamol. This is if that's the cost of reshoring, well, as Paul Hudson said, let's not, let's be straight about this, and let's not, let's be clear about what's at stake and what's and what lies at the core of this debate. It means that that's people want, clearly, because a box of paracetamol, that's €2. It's from €2 to €2.05. Is that a problem? Well, it's not a problem, but they are, these reshoring operations allowed and made possible by, thanks to technologies 20 years ago when these relocations were justified at the time by the cost of the labor. And now this equation, this economic equation is outdated because industry can deliver improvements in efficiencies made possible by digital, artificial intelligence, what we call the manufacturing capability 4.0. So we've kind of stayed, I might say, on an old industrial model. So we can, and we need to ramp up very quickly the machines if we want to reshore. It means that what was key in the restart plan was that, okay, at the end of the day, the best we can do for reshoring is to find investment, is to really put in place economic policies, measures to encourage industrial players to reindustrialize and renew capital investments. Once we've said that, for reshoring for sovereignty issues, if the cost is at a limited cost, we must do it. And but let's be clear when it comes to reshoring. In terms of jobs, we're talking between 10 and 20% of decisions are led to relate to labor costs. So, and if we were to reshore, we would gain an additional 5 to 10%. We won't relocate or reshore everything. And because the share of labor cost in the analytical accounting of manufacturing plants is, almost involve reshoring with very few jobs. So some say in the public debate, we need to reshore, we need to bring back our jobs. That's not going to work that way. But if for reasons related to independence, with all reservations, we can reshore with an increase in cost that's limited, that's an open door. That's obviously, that's stating the obvious here. And in economic policy, these orders of magnitude, we need to know what we're talking about here. Very difficult because, yet again, if I'm talking about masks, that's one thing. If I talk about ventilators, that's really, we're talking 15,000, 20,000 euros per unit and a few cents for masks. So it's very difficult to answer that question. But what I can say is authorities have made tremendous efforts to restart the economy. I think it's absolutely incredible, and I wish there's been criticism and really not positive criticisms on these respects. I think indeed it took us some time to react and to take measures to address the crisis. But I think, to be quite honest, it's extremely complex to understand how what can be done, and how we need to explain how we can move forward in European level and French in France here. So it's interesting to see how people react. And from €2 to 2.10 euros for a box of medicine. Wow, people, that prices has gone up. Even for 10 cents, people react in an extremely, founded manner. So we need to be, the price is extremely sensitive, even for drugs. You need to treat your health. It's not going to change. 10% is nothing. No, we're talking 1% or 2% price hike. And secondly, we're talking about investments involved in reshoring. The issue is not about short term. My thinking is long-term based. Okay, you might manufacture back in Europe. You might be so competitive in terms of the productions that might come from China or Malaysia or others. We're going to be accepting this for some time. We're going to be doing that for some time because we want to be sovereign in production. What's going to be happening in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line? And you know what? I can find cheaper in Asia. And then all of a sudden, might go back to the old model. So, we might create protection measures to protect what's manufactured here in Europe. And now we come to additional difficulties related to international markets, international corporations, because, as you know, if we start subsidizing too much some of our industries, we might end up with problems on our hands. So the issue really is not about short term, it's on the medium to long term. Is this system sustainable? And if it is sustainable, are we accepting its cost? And if so, yes, why not? Not necessarily very confident saying I'm going to be ready 5 years, 10 years down the line, that it might cost 10 to 20% more. So indeed, I agree in terms of creating a sustainable system to guarantee the right, care, protection of risks, and the key ambitions might be a pitfall. We need to move away from, or stay away from. Shouldn't be a discussion on for or against reshoring. Public debate is now stigmatizing all this. And the challenge is, you look at reshoring is a solution for some of the products, and in some circumstances, that's not something we see in the political debate. Sometimes people focus on one word that's ill-used and becomes a for or against. That's not the case. That's not the point. No, this is against reshoring at all costs, but not really. Reshoring is not the only way forward. So we need to step out of this opposition, and so that's the final question precisely we wanted to address here. So was it a top priority question, or were there other questions to ask ourselves for Europe to address possible health challenges, because there might be others? There's been 4 pandemics in the 20th century, so let's take a look at what Paul Hudson has to say on that, and then it will be over to you.
So it's an excellent question about R&D, manufacturing, innovation. There's a much broader question. How does Europe compete with the US and China? The Chinese R&D used to be really about manufacturing. Then it became about drug development. Now it's about basic science. The investment and the opportunity in China is so great that China will be a force in innovation. We know, of course, the US is already a force with more than 90% of venture capital and investments and new opportunities coming in the US on the east or the west coast. It's time for Europe to step forward a little bit more. The number of Nobel Prizes for medicine is significant in Europe, but the translational medicine link between academia and starting a company to make sure a medicine can be pushed through a 10-year development cycle and come out the other side to change a patient's life is a long-term commitment. You have to make sure that in Europe there is a real opportunity to maintain that commitment. To do that, it has to be attractive as a union. To do that, you need to make sure that innovation that already exists is rewarded. So when prices on innovation or prescriptions for innovation are constricted, it means Europe becomes less attractive. So there has to be a sort of overall understanding of the long-term innovation cycle, what that means for individual member states and how they're committed to building a productive ecosystem and not rationing innovation now. You know, in the end, pharmaceuticals are normally 9–10% of the total healthcare bill. It's a lot, I understand, but where we need to move to is a world where the value is properly understood and not just the price. The value for the patient and for the health system. And we see that every day. That has to change that dynamic. Europe has to be a health sovereign, and it needs to have a vibrant innovation base.
Voilà, donc il dit trois choses. Hein. Il dit la Chine, c'est
stating three things.
Les États-Unis,
China has evolved and moved towards innovation. So the US, as more is, and Europe must commit towards R&D to innovate. And then he's telling us then this will come at a price. At the end of the day, reshoring is a legitimate topic, but in the health context, in the environmental and current economic context, how do we go about having a health industry that develops a lot in the coming years? Was that the case over the first few years? Well, I looked at medical devices with our friends from MedTech in France, and blockages, existing blockages here. You can see that the entrepreneurial fabric is extremely dense in France, with less challenges here and there in terms of contracting with the public, not enough capital access. And even if, honestly, we are doing the job, right, not on the par with the Americans yet, but with tremendous issues in terms of obtaining certifications, approvals, and some industrial players tell us it's easier to sell medical devices in China or in the US than in Germany. So need to draw the lessons, really to draw the conclusions there. So the very, very good news is that with this crisis, Europe has made giant leaps forward. And as in all crises, Europe starts later and then does the job when it gets into gear. And what I can say is that this is a change in the mindset. We've unlocked this mental blockage which we in Europe, where there was a kind of free market for the consumer, and now we are in the mind of European elites. We're moving towards Europe with a will, technological will, power from a technological and economic standpoint. So Europe means a peacekeeper in economic terms, so it is lagging behind, not synced with the reality of the world as the world of business is from a Chinese and American standpoint. So us and you, but especially you help Europe to say, well, where are these blocking points? What can be addressed? Because here there's a window of opportunity that's just opened up. Is that your standpoint? Yes. Earlier we talked about the role of the state. What the state does well is it expresses a real voluntarist approach and real openness in terms of dialogue. And the issue is that when there's a will to go in a directions with public service, and then one step forward, one step back. And price, we've seen that with the price of the medicine, and but we talk about the overall price of medicine is up 0% over the last 10 years. So, but stating that to 10% in France, about 15%, 14, 15. So innovation is welcome, and we turn cancer into a chronic disease that's been the case for 5-10 years now. At a constant price, at constant budget. So there's no sector that's just as limited as none of that, yeah. And state being 100%. So we have 2 minutes to go. So this COVID-19 situation and crisis is a fantastic opportunity to really review the entire system, and this is the work we must exemplify in Europe and at local countries. Unfortunately, Europe remains a complicated market, especially in the field of health, as they debate there. But how are we going to address health in Europe? Who does what? Who decides what? Because the manifest phase of what happened between the state, the regions, Europe, who did what, who could decide what. So here we have the opportunity to look at the system, to make a decision at some point. Should we give more power to Europe or should we not? And what are the implications? So a lot of work has been done. And you can see with Thierry Breton has been really instrumental trying to change this mindset and approach. So fingers crossed. I think what's going to be important is to keep the dialogue open. Let's not be fearful of moving forward. And maybe we might accept to have less control, fewer controls for more efficiency. We need to make a decision because we can't go on like that. That's Europe, that's not Europe, that's prerogatives, we don't. So this is back in February up until now. This is not sustainable because efficiency is impacted, but in Europe we're very proactive, we do have ideas. And the medical field, Europe is a phenomenal source of innovation. I think we have funds in Europe. What's lacking is a certain vision, a certain serenity, and into the next 10 years. So we are in this phase of innovation. We need to get things organized, and we need to recover what we had. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Père Lusso, for being with us with this video link, and we'll start again at 10:30 on the role of insurers in tomorrow's health. Thank you very much.
Merci.